Welcome to a deep dive into a case that'll leave you thinking, wait, what?
Yeah, this one's a real head-scratcher.
We're going to Jacksonville, Florida, back in 2011.
Okay.
2-year-old David Galarraga tragically passes away.
Right.
And the investigation uncovers a family history. Well, complicated doesn't even begin to cover it.
It's one of those situations where it's not just a simple who did it.
Right.
We're dealing with a 12-year-old suspect,
Cristian,
who is also David's brother.
Yeah.
And a mother, Bonella, whose actions before David's death are, well, questionable.
Yeah, like really questionable.
Yeah.
To say the least.
To say the very least.
Okay, get this.
Okay.
While David was injured at home, Bonella's internet search history shows she was looking up things like concussion symptoms, unconsciousness.
Really?
That seems like that's a red flag to me.
A big one.
Why wasn't she like rushing him to the hospital?
Well, I mean, legally speaking, it points to negligence, right? But I think if you look a little deeper, you see this potential fear of authorities.
Oh, interesting.
Possibly coming from Bonella's past run-ins with Child Protective Services.
Okay, so we've got a suspicious death,
Yeah.
a young suspect, and a mother with a potential motive to cover things up.
It's shaping up to be quite the story.
And our primary source here is a YouTube video from EWU Crime Storytime, which features never-before-seen police interview footage.
Oh, wow.
And this adds a whole nother layer to this whole thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, having access to this raw footage is amazing. It's like we're right there in the interrogation room with them.
Totally.
You can actually see the detectives' careful approach when they're talking to Cristian, trying to get the truth, but also being really aware of his age.
Yeah.
And, you know, how vulnerable he might be.
Totally. And that vulnerability is definitely evident throughout these interviews. You see Cristian's story kind of shifting and changing as he's questioned.
Oh, really?
Initially, he's presented as a witness, but eventually confesses to pushing David into a bookshelf multiple times, resulting in those really severe head injuries.
Oh, wow.
It's really a heartbreaking confession.
Yeah.
Especially when you think about what we know about David's broken leg, which happened about 2 months before this whole thing.
Okay, remind me about the broken leg.
Okay, so for the broken leg, Bonella was giving all these conflicting stories about, like, oh, it was the monkey bars, or maybe it was the jungle gym, which, by the way, their apartment complex didn't even have.
Oh, okay.
And then Cristian, he claims that he yogaed David's leg.
He yogaed it.
Causing the break.
What does that even mean?
I don't know.
That's strange.
Yeah, I mean, could this be like a sign of some, I don't know, like developmental delays or something?
Possibly.
Or just a way of, like, trying to explain something he doesn't fully understand?
Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of detail that makes this so much more than just your average crime story, right? Like, we're talking about childhood development, possible abuse.
Right.
I mean, it raises some serious questions about Cristian's awareness. Like, was he aware of the consequences of what he was doing?
Right. And then you add in this family's really troubled past, and it gets even more complicated.
Oh, I bet.
So Bonella, we're learning, had a really, really rough childhood herself.
Yeah.
She became a mother at 11 years old.
11? Wow.
Yeah.
That's incredibly young.
Think about that, 11 years old.
So she was basically a child raising a child.
Exactly. And then it continues with the death of Cristian's stepfather.
Okay.
Who, according to some sources, had been abusing Cristian.
Oh, no.
Before taking his own life.
So you have this young boy who's already seen so much tragedy.
Yeah.
And then this happens.
And then this.
It really makes you think, how much can we hold a 12-year-old accountable?
Yeah.
Under these kinds of circumstances.
It's a really, really tough question.
It is.
And this whole case really kind of forces us to face this gray area.
Yeah.
Between victim and perpetrator.
Totally.
And with all this new information coming to light about their family history, it's becoming more and more clear that, well, Cristian might be both.
He might be both.
Yeah.
A product of his environment shaped by experiences that, honestly, no child should have to go through.
No, absolutely not.
It doesn't excuse his actions, but it definitely it adds another layer, right, to how we understand what happened.
And it makes the legal proceedings surrounding this whole thing even more fascinating.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, how do you even begin to navigate charging a 12-year-old as an adult
for
murder, especially with all this baggage?
Yeah, it's uncharted territory.
Totally.
Legally, ethically, I mean.
It's a lot.
It's a lot.
And we're going to dive deep into all of that
Okay.
in the next part of your deep dive.
Looking forward to it.
But for now, I want you to think about this.
Yep.
If you were sitting on that jury, knowing everything we've talked about, how would you weigh the evidence?
It's a question a lot of people were asking at the time.
Yeah.
And it's one that we're going to keep exploring as we unpack this really, really unsettling case.
Absolutely. So we left off with a pretty big question.
Yeah.
How do you handle a case where a 12-year-old
Right.
is potentially responsible for his little brother's death?
And that potential became a reality.
Yeah.
2 days after being admitted to the hospital, David was taken off life support and passed away.
Oh, wow.
And the autopsy confirmed, what everybody feared.
Blunt force trauma.
Blunt force trauma to the head.
It's just devastating.
It is.
For everyone involved. Knowing that a delay in medical attention might have made things worse.
Absolutely.
And it definitely didn't help Bonella's case, right?
No.
Legally speaking.
Remember those internet searches we talked about?
Yeah.
They became kind of a key piece of evidence.
Oh, wow.
Really painting this picture of negligence.
Right.
Just 2 weeks after David's death, Bonella was arrested and charged with aggravated manslaughter.
Wow. Aggravated manslaughter.
Yeah.
That's not just an accident.
No.
It's a big deal.
It is.
So let's talk about Cristian for a second.
Okay.
What were the legal options when it came to dealing with, a 12-year-old suspect?
Yeah, that's where Florida law gets really interesting.
Okay.
You see, in certain situations, especially for very serious crimes like this one, they can actually try children as adults.
So instead of focusing on rehab, the fact that, a 12-year-old's brain isn't fully developed, they were considering putting him through the adult court system.
Exactly.
Wow.
And you can imagine how much controversy this caused.
I bet.
It wasn't just some legal technicality.
Right.
It sparked this huge ethical debate.
Yeah.
About how we deal with child offenders.
Especially ones who have already experienced so much trauma.
Right, exactly.
I can only imagine what people were saying.
Oh, yeah, there were strong arguments on both sides.
So what about the people who supported trying Cristian as an adult? What were they saying?
Well, their main argument was really about the seriousness of the crime. They felt that, taking a life, no matter how old you are, deserved serious consequences.
Right.
Some even argued that, not trying him as an adult would kind of send the wrong message.
Interesting.
About how seriously we take these kinds of crimes.
Right, like, it's okay because he's 12.
Yeah, exactly.
But then, of course, you have the other side.
Right.
Who saw Cristian as a victim himself.
Exactly.
So what were their concerns?
Well, they focused a lot on the developmental differences between a child and an adult. Emphasizing that a 12-year-old just can't fully grasp the long-term consequences of their actions.
Right.
Like an adult would.
Right.
And of course, they brought up his past, the abuse, saying the system had already failed him, basically.
Wow.
Leading to this horrible situation.
It's just, it's a really tough situation.
It is.
You're weighing the need for justice with,
right.
The understanding that, a child's life shouldn't be ruined by one awful act.
Absolutely.
So what happened? What did they decide to do?
Well, in the end, they decided to indict Cristian for first-degree murder.
Wow.
Making him the youngest person in Duval County history to ever face that kind of charge.
It's crazy.
It was.
Yeah, I can see why people were protesting.
Oh, yeah. There are protests, discussions nationwide.
Yeah.
About the whole purpose of the justice system, even.
It's easy to get caught up in all the legal stuff.
Yeah.
But we can't forget, there's a young boy at the center of this.
Of course.
Who, in many ways, was a victim too.
Right.
Did public opinion of Cristian change at all?
It did, yeah. I mean, at first, there was a lot of shock and outrage.
But as people learned more about his upbringing, the abuse, the lack of support, I think a lot of people started to feel sympathy for him.
Oh, wow.
There was even a petition online calling for leniency.
Really?
Yeah, thousands of people signed it.
So while the courts were going for a harsh punishment, there were people who understood that there was more to the story.
Yeah, a lot of people recognized how complex the situation was.
They saw that locking him up in adult prison wouldn't solve anything.
Exactly.
So what happened to Bonella and Cristian?
Well, Bonella's case was resolved first.
Okay.
She ended up taking a plea deal.
Okay.
Pleading guilty to aggravated manslaughter.
Aggravated manslaughter.
Yeah.
Wow.
The judge, took into account the time she'd already served.
And,
her own history as a victim of domestic violence.
Right.
And sentenced her to a combination of prison time, probation, and some mandatory programs.
So like a mix of punishment and rehab. Yeah, it seemed like the judge was trying to, help her break the cycle of abuse.
Right. And what about Cristian?
Well, his case took a lot longer to work through the system. But eventually a plea deal was reached there too.
Okay.
And the charges against him were reduced.
So they realized that, first-degree murder with a potential life sentence was not the right move.
Right. It was just, not appropriate for a 12-year-old with his background.
So what did he end up getting?
Well, he was convicted of aggravated battery and manslaughter.
Okay.
And sentenced to 7 years in a juvenile detention facility.
7 years.
Yeah. And the focus shifted from punishment to providing him with therapy, education,
Right.
A chance to work through the underlying issues.
It sounds like a much better approach.
It does.
But 7 years is still a long time,
It is a long time.
especially for a kid.
Yeah. And he was also under court supervision after his release in 2018.
Oh, wow.
And his probation finally ended in 2023.
So legally, the case is closed.
Yes.
But I imagine the emotional impact of this whole thing
Yeah.
is going to last a lifetime.
There's no doubt about that. This case really tore that family apart.
Yeah.
And it exposed a lot of the weaknesses in our systems that are supposed to protect children.
It's just, sometimes even when it's legally over,
Yeah.
the search for justice and healing and understanding,
Yeah.
it doesn't just stop.
No, it doesn't.
It really makes you wonder, where do they go from here?
Right.
Can they move on from this?
That's a good question.
Or will they always be defined by what happened?
Those are questions that we'll explore as we look at what happened after the case was closed
Okay.
and the bigger picture of what it all means.
It's hard to even imagine the weight that Cristian and Benella carry with them after all of this.
It is.
Can they ever escape the shadow of this?
It's a question that just lingers, doesn't it? Even after the trials are done and the news stories stop running, and we've seen how trauma can reach beyond the people directly involved.
Right.
Think about David's other siblings.
Oh, yeah.
They lost their brother,
Of course.
but they also had to witness everything leading up to his death.
It's just, what kind of impact does that even have on them?
It's unfathomable, really.
It is.
And then you have Cristian.
Yeah.
He's a young adult now,
Right.
trying to make a life for himself
Right.
in a world that will always remember him for this.
Yeah.
Can he build a future, have a family, knowing that this is a part of his past?
It's a lot to carry.
It is. It's a heavy burden. But, people are capable of amazing things.
Yeah.
Growth and change, even after experiencing something this awful.
Right.
We've seen it before.
Yeah.
People who have done terrible things, especially when they were young, go on to live good, meaningful lives.
That's hopeful, at least.
It is.
But it makes me wonder, what kind of support do people like Cristian and Benella need to really reintegrate into society?
That's the question, isn't it? Is it enough to just serve your time?
Right.
Hope for the best. I think we can do more.
Yeah.
We need these comprehensive support systems.
Right.
For trauma, job training, counseling.
Really give them the tools to heal.
Exactly. To rebuild their lives.
Yeah. And actually be able to contribute.
To be productive members of society.
This case just really highlights the need for a different approach.
A more holistic approach to justice.
Yeah.
One that doesn't just punish,
Right.
but also focuses on rehabilitation.
Rehab and also prevention.
Yes, exactly. We have to think about how we can do better.
Right.
How can we help families before they reach this point?
Right.
Before it's too late.
It comes back to those cracks in the system.
Yeah.
If we could identify families that are struggling
Right.
with poverty or violence or just a lack of resources,
Uh-huh.
maybe we could step in before tragedy strikes.
Early intervention is so important.
It is.
Think about things like mental health services.
Right.
Affordable childcare.
Yeah.
Education programs that actually address these issues.
Yeah, things like conflict resolution.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Healthy relationships.
Yeah.
These are investments that can benefit everyone in the long run.
It's easy to feel overwhelmed
Yeah.
thinking about all of these huge problems.
Yeah.
But even small actions can make a difference.
They can, absolutely.
Like volunteering at a shelter,
Uh-huh.
donating to organizations that support families,
Yeah.
or just being more aware of the challenges people face in our communities.
Those are all good places to start.
And it starts with these conversations,
Yes.
talking about the hard stuff,
Uh-huh.
challenging our own assumptions,
Right.
really looking at the uncomfortable truths about our society.
That's what this deep dive has been all about.
It has.
Looking at this case.
Yeah, we started with this shocking detail.
Yeah, a mother searching for concussion symptoms while her child's hurt.
It's awful.
It is. And from there, we uncovered this whole story of abuse.
Neglect. Systemic failure.
It's just, and then a 2-year-old boy loses his life.
Yeah.
And his brother ends up in court.
We've talked about accountability.
The ethics of trying a child as an adult.
The impact of trauma.
And we've seen how the justice system tries to balance things out.
Right.
Punishment with rehabilitation.
That's a tough balance.
It is. And honestly, we have more questions than answers.
You do.
But I think that's the point, isn't it?
I think so.
It's not about easy answers.
No.
Or placing blame.
It's about looking at the nuances.
Yeah.
Understanding how complicated human behavior is.
And how our systems can fail.
And it's about having compassion.
And pushing for change.
So as we wrap up this deep dive,
Yeah.
we encourage you to keep asking those tough questions.
Right?
Think about how you can help make the world a better place.
Even the small things matter.
They do. Because remember, this isn't just about one case in Florida. Right. This is about making sure every child feels safe and loved and supported.
Creating a world where families have the resources they need.
So tragedies like this don't happen.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.